Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into the foundational lesson from a book that pretty much changed the game for personal finance, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Let's jump right in.
So the author, Robert Kiyosaki, essentially grew up with two dads, and their advice, especially about money, couldn't have been more different. I mean, look at that. This one single, powerful contrast in how they saw the world really set him on a journey to figure out why the rich think so differently from the rest of us.
Okay, so on one hand, you had his poor dad. This was his actual father, a super educated guy with a PhD who worked for the government. But even with a good salary, he always seemed to be struggling with money. Then you have his rich dad, who was his best friend's father. This guy didn't even finish 8th grade, but he built a business empire and became one of the richest men in Hawaii.
And this, right here, is such a powerful little insight into their psychology. His poor dad would say, "I can't afford it." It's a statement. It's an end to the conversation, and it shuts your brain down. But Rich Dad, he would ask a question: how can I afford it? And that little change forces your brain to switch on, to start looking for answers and creative solutions. It's a game changer.
So where did this whole incredible financial education begin? Well, like a lot of life-changing stories, it started with a moment of pain when he was just a kid. He was only 9 years old when he decided he was sick and tired of being the poor kid.
Yeah, you can just imagine that, right? The sting of being left out of a trip to a friend's beach house, all because his family didn't have the same kind of money. That was the spark. It wasn't really about being greedy, it was about wanting to break free from the limits that being poor put on his life. So he goes straight to his own dad, his poor dad, and asks him flat out. Now his dad, being an academic, didn't really have the answer, but he did something absolutely crucial. He suggested that Robert go ask his friend Mike's dad, the man who would soon become his rich dad.
So Rich Dad agrees to teach the boys, but he wasn't about to sit them down in a classroom with a textbook. Nope, his classroom was the real world, and his first lesson came in the form of a job offer that was honestly designed to be really frustrating.
Get this, for 3 hours, every single Saturday, Robert and his friend Mike's job was to dust off the canned goods in one of Rich Dad's convenience stores. And for this incredibly boring work, they were paid just 10 cents an hour. Even back in the 50s, that was next to nothing.
So after a few weeks of this, he was just done. He was bored out of his mind, he felt totally taken advantage of, and the worst part was, he hadn't learned a single thing about money. He was just cheap labor, and the whole lesson felt like a total scam.
He finally hit his breaking point. He decides he's going to march right in there, confront Rich Dad, and demand to be taught something, or at least get a raise. And he has no idea, but he's walking right into the real lesson. He's doing exactly what Rich Dad was hoping he would do.
So why do it this way? Why make him so frustrated? Because Rich Dad wasn't trying to teach them how to be good little employees. He was waiting for them to get angry enough, to feel frustrated enough, to finally stand up and question the whole system instead of just quietly taking their tiny paycheck.
And that confrontation, that's when the first huge lesson dropped. Rich Dad finally pulled back the curtain and explained this invisible trap that keeps most people working their entire lives and never really getting anywhere.
He told him, look, life pushes everybody around. The feelings Robert was having, that anger, that sense of injustice, that was the lesson. See, most people either just give up and let life push them around, or they get angry and push back at the wrong things, like their boss or their job. They never realize that life itself is the teacher.
And this brings us to probably the most famous concept from the whole book, the rat race. He defined it as this endless loop that most people are stuck in, where their lives aren't run by logic, but by two really powerful emotions, fear and greed.
It works like this. First, there's fear. The fear of not having enough money to pay your bills. That's what pushes you to get a job. Then, once you get that paycheck, greed or maybe just desire kicks in. You start picturing all the cool stuff you can buy. That leads you to spend all your money, which of course brings the fear right back. And so the cycle, get up, go to work, pay bills, starts all over again.
So to truly break them out of this mindset, Rich Dad did something that sounds completely crazy. He took away the paycheck. He told them, you can keep working on Saturdays, but I'm not going to pay you anything, not a dime. This forced them to stop thinking about a wage and start looking for their own way to make money.
And you know what happened? With that little 10-cent carrot no longer dangling in front of them, their minds were suddenly forced wide open. They started looking at the world around them not as employees, but as entrepreneurs.
and they started to see things that were totally invisible to them before.
And then they saw it, an opportunity that was literally being thrown in the trash. See, every week the store manager would tear the covers off the old comic books that didn't sell and just toss the rest. To everyone else, this was garbage. But to Robert and Mike, it was an asset.
What they did next was just genius in its simplicity. They took all those free comics and opened a comic book library in Mike's basement. They charged the neighborhood kids 10 cents admission to come in and read as many comics as they wanted for a couple of hours. They even hired Mike's sister to be the librarian. This was their very first asset, a business that made money for them.
And get this, they were soon pulling in $9.50 a week. That was more than 30 times what they were making with their old 30-cent weekly paycheck. And the best part? They didn't even have to be there. This was the light bulb moment, the difference between working for money and having your money work for you. By taking what everybody else saw as trash and turning it into their own little cash-generating machine, they had finally, truly learned the very first and most important lesson in Rich Dad's entire philosophy.
And here it is. Lesson number 1. The rich don't work for money. It's that simple and that profound. The poor and the middle class are conditioned to work hard for a paycheck. But the rich? They learn how to build or buy assets that put money into their pocket. They make their money work for them.
See, once your mind isn't consumed with just finding that next paycheck, your whole perspective shifts. You start to see opportunities absolutely everywhere, while other people who are just looking for job security walk right past them, completely blind. And really, that's the whole point of this first lesson. It was never about the comic books. It's about a fundamental shift in your mindset, and it forces you to ask a really powerful question. What comic books, what overlooked opportunities are you walking past in your own life every single day?